Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Mage, Errant, Book 7, The Last Echo of the Lord of Bells. Chapters 58 through 60, Ever Burning, Unwilling Allies, and The Scrap Heap of History. In these chapters, everybody has to get on board this Alustin train, and pretty much nobody is happy about it. Meanwhile, we've got a whole thing with a new demon, and you guys, he's like what I thought maybe Bakori was. And that is to say, not a bad dude at all. He just looks really scary. I love this. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Dan for commissioning this episode. I don't see Dan in the chat, and he's usually here, so I'm going to assume either he just can't make it today or is running late. But Dan, miss you. MX Shard is here, though, talking about where they're living in the sunset at 4:14 p.m., which is cruel. Washington State. That's where my mother lives. Okay. So let's just get this. This is something that I have very mixed feelings about in terms of the first of these three chapters. So Ever Burning is a chapter almost entirely dedicated to Niana Everflame. And this is one where I'm like, I don't dislike the chapter, but I feel like it really slowed things down for me. And again, there's just I said this last week, and I feel like this is a really particular example of what I meant, where we have a whole chapter dedicated to somebody that we had never met, who's a part of this battle. She hasn't even really engaged with anybody that we know. And I understand wanting to tell this story because she as a person is interesting. Her abilities are really specific and interesting. And the ways in which her self-sacrifice and willingness to take damage on behalf of her country is a really particular energy that we haven't really gotten from anybody. Like, there was a little bit of this with Valia, but it was so wrapped up in conflicted feelings about Alustin and everything that this is really much more of a, assured, I don't want to use the word one note, but definitely hyper-focused individual who just, they have a certain idea of what their identity and function within everything is, and they don't really think anything of giving up their lives in service of that. They feel like that's the point of them. And how would they live with themselves if they weren't to try and put it all on the line for the sake of saving other people? And so in that respect, I was interested, but in terms of the overarching story right now, this is just not what I'm interested in for now. Do you get what I'm saying? And it feels weird how much John Bierce is doing this at this point. I feel like there's a sense for me that he started deciding who he was going to have involved in this battle and realized we were going to have a lot of great powers and a lot of pulling all the stops out on different sides. And he had to cram in the details about a lot of these characters because there hadn't really been another suitable place in the story to put them. And I just don't think this chapter serves our purpose at this point in the book. And I hesitate to, like, you know, because, like, I really am somebody who doesn't mind meandering storylines depending on how it goes. I do need, though, there to be a little bit of a link between where we're meandering and me as a reader, because that is what ties me in. If we had this, like, going off into somebody's past and learning about them with, say, Alinea, somebody that we have, like, gotten to know better, who has been here throughout, it might not feel like such a departure, or if it did, I would at least be more engaged and interested, because it's somebody who has an effect on another major character. She's Sabe's grandmother, and therefore it's possible what's going on with her could affect Sabe. But this person is nobody to me. And choosing now, of all times, to drop what feels like a whole side story is a bizarre choice that I really feel like this book is so long already. I mean, this is literally, we're in chapters 58 through 60. Homie needs an editor. I'm sorry, John. I really do like your writing and your world building and everything. But bro, you have got to learn some restraint on these parts of your stories. And I know that it's been mentioned that he has a Patreon, and on the Patreon, he will drop side stories. And I cannot help but laugh that he's dropping side stories in his Patreon, and he's still putting this stuff in the main book, which means that he is a real, like, Brandon Sanderson type. That he has so much story and so many ideas that he, like, doesn't, it's just pouring out of him. You know what I mean? So I just really, I need a little bit more restraint and tightness, because it has been months of this battle at this point, like, for me. And I understood when Dan was talking to me in the last episode in the chat, and he said that it, like, you know, if you're flying through this in a binge, it goes by a lot faster. And I believe that. But this chapter, I really feel, even if I were binging, I would kind of step back and be like, what is this? Like, you guys, I was waiting for this entire chapter for her to do something to come into the path of one of our guys, and it never happens, and then she just dies. And we had this happen with What's-Her-Face of the Vault, but we had met her. And she was cool. And she had been involved with teaching Hugh. We had an attachment to her. This is not that. So it's just a really strange choice that I would rethink. And there, even if you did want to tell this kind of story, maybe fit this in somewhere else in the series. And I don't know, you know, how you would do that. Maybe you would have people telling stories about folks that they have met, or you just have interstitials where you get a history of a particular great power. I think for somebody like John Bierce, interstitials might work really well. Those are the kinds of things that, depending on, like, this is something that I hate to keep, like, bringing up Will White, because I'm not trying to pretend Will White's a perfect writer, but he does different things with different books. And one of the things that he does in the Dawn and Darkness, Darkness and Dawn series is he takes, like, a chapter's opening or something from what's allegedly a textbook or history book in the universe that he's talking about. So you read, like, the opening paragraphs of a document describing somebody, and you get that as a reference point. And maybe something like that. Like, maybe we're reading Galvacrin's Guide to, and I know there isn't necessarily one for great powers, I don't recall, but perhaps we could have something like that cut into the books along the way, so that by the time we get to this book and we meet these great powers, they mean something more to us because we've had previews about who they are along the way. And that would also go a long way towards, like, getting us to understand just what a variety of powers there are and how big a battle this is, because everybody who's coming out are people who we have heard of in literal history books, so we know that they are like big fucking deals. But yeah, so sorry, Emic Shard says, yeah, she was a compelling character to read about, but there was no prior investment in Niana, and it makes it feel a little awkward. Yeah, you know, that's all I'm saying is, like, I don't have a problem with wanting to tell this story. I get it. And I do think she's an interesting character. This is just not the time. We're in the fucking weeds right now, as it is. There are so many characters to keep track of, and so many names, and I feel like I've been doing pretty well. We don't need to be throwing this into the mix right now. But I'm going to go over her chapter fairly quickly. So she's dying. She is aware she's dying. And she's basically like, yeah, that's fine. She had crushed more foes of the Dominion than she could count. She was a patriot, and it would have been a pleasure to die in service of the Dominion. And now, in a single day, her regrets had come to outweigh all her service. So she is just coping with this really, really intense guilt over the fact that they called her out for her final moments. This was part of the deal that she made to go into retirement, that eventually, when they needed her, she would be allowed to die with honor on the battlefield, being their kind of last resort, and sacrificing herself to save her nation. And she's doing this, and it didn't work. Havath falls anyway. And that is really cruel, you know, to have her put it all on the line, but she's still here watching it go down, and there's nothing she can do to stop it. So we jump back into her past a little bit. There were 3 ways to tell when a youth developed a gravity affinity. The first was the moon. Within a few months of developing a gravity affinity, a teen would start to be able to feel the pull of the moon as it and Anastas danced around each other. The second was simply travel. It was extraordinarily common for teens taking long trips to realize gravity was not constant, and it varied subtly but noticeably across the planet, which I have to assume is also true of the Earth, but I will be honest, I have never heard of that. There's no reason for me to have heard of it. It's not something I would look into, but I'm really interested now, you know, in looking into that. And then the third way, other gravity mages. The very day her mana reservoirs had first congealed, she heard one of her family's servants using their weak gravity magic to help move crates. And she had thought the drumbeat that she heard was somebody's, like, actual instrument, that there was somebody here performing. And so she runs around the castle, like, where's the party at? And eventually, let's see, as she grew older and more powerful, she learned to read gravity magic by its drum beats, its strength, direction, and permutations, all contained in the beat, tone, and resonance of the drums it sounded in her mind. And the gravity affinity, everybody's like, dope, this is very, very useful. And then her white phosphorus affinity comes to light. Pun intended. Stories of mages who struggled to discover their true affinities abounded. The Wanderer, most famously, of course, who had taken decades to discover her affinity. Mages of forbidden affinities, such as Yellowstone, sometimes went their whole lives without discovering theirs. Mages of affinities for rare plants and animals. Mages of obscure varieties, variant affinities, often confuse their affinities with more common forms, such as when affinities for a specific blood type were confused for an unreliable standard blood affinity. That is bananas. Like, you've got blood mages, but then you just got type A mages? I would be a type A mage. Get it? That's a little, you know, retentive joke there. But yeah, that would be very annoying. If I could only control one blood type, but I was like up against a person who could just control all types, I would be fucking annoyed. Like, that's just so irritating. Niana had once heard of a common fire mage who took 5 years to discover her affinity because her affinity sense manifested as a sense of fatigue. and her family spent years taking her to various healers trying to diagnose her strange sleep disorder, which I can't even really understand how that would work. I don't like her affinity sense manifested as fatigue, like that. I don't even, does that mean that she felt fatigued when she used it, or that she felt fatigued around fire, or I wasn't really sure what to make of that. They had discovered her white phosphorus affinity not even 3 hours after her gravity affinity when they took her to Greyflute City. It was a rare affinity. It had taken over an hour of walking through the halls with their specimen cases before Niana heard the singing of the little chunk of white phosphorus in its airless glass container. Her family, when the affinity testers explained the dangers, promptly forced her to swear never to use it. Ever the dutiful daughter, Niana listened. For 5 years, she cast not a single white phosphorus spell. But then, eventually, some shit starts going down. And she's like, oh, okay, well, now I'm definitely doing the thing, right? Like, I got to. And I can see how that would be where you just decide, I'm sorry, but the deal that we made is off. Let's see. So we go back into the present for a little while, and then she thinks she's being attacked by another gravity mage, which, spoilers, turns out to not quite be the case. And I had actually kind of it wasn't that I wondered if there was really somebody there. I was not that ahead of the game, but the constant mention of this drumbeat, even though that's the sound that she was picking up when she first manifested her affinity, all I could think about was how much it like felt like a heartbeat. And so when she figured out what it was, I was sort of like, interesting. So when her ability manifested, it sounded, I'm assuming, like she could hear other people's heartbeats in a way, which is wild. Niana had just turned 20 when she disobeyed her order. In fairness, her family was dead when she disobeyed. And yeah, they get flattened and she's just like, I'm gonna fucking take you down. There had been a monster that attacked and she has no idea why. It seems like just fucking bored. Just wanted to fuck somebody's life up and just went ahead and did it. Most of her family died the instant the manor struck the sea. Niana, her grandmother, and her great aunt had been picnicking outside when the attack happened. She had joined the Havathi military 2 years prior. The Kraken toyed with her like a child. She managed to protect her grandmother and great aunt for several minutes before the Kraken managed to pull her great aunt away and throw her out to sea, her light affinity useless to save her. With only herself and her grandmother to protect, the next few minutes were a grueling slog as the Kraken constantly teased and pulled at the two of them, trying to split them apart or simply overwhelm Niana with raw magical might. In the end, her grandmother had been ripped in two by the dueling gravity mages at Niana's first slip-up, her first failure to compensate for one of the Kraken's tricks. And then the Kraken just left, waving its thorn tentacles mockingly as it flew out to sea. And then she was alone on the flowered hill. And I was like, this is like the thing about life, is that you want things to have been for a reason, at least. Even if if you didn't have control of it. If there's a reason for something, you can trick yourself into thinking you have control over it. It was just that you didn't have enough information. If things had gone a slightly different way, you maybe could have stopped it. But when it's something like this, and it was simply somebody's whim, they were having a bad fucking day, and they were just like, you know what? Fuck these assholes living on my beach. There's nothing you could have done. It's just completely pulls all of the control out of your hands. And nobody likes that, you know? So her only warning of another gravity mage attacking was nausea and disorientation. You don't say. So we jump back in time again. The Dominion had judged it unlikely they could track down the Kraken. And within minutes, Niana merely helped suppress the Kraken's gravity magic while the beast was impaled. Again and again, she had been warned, once you'd have your revenge, whether it was satisfying or not, it would leave you empty, drain you of the fire that kept you going since your loss. Her fire had been replaced with something else entirely, pride in the nation that had avenged her family so swiftly, even when there was little hope of success nor profit in it. Niana was to be fast-tracked in the Archmage programs after the battle, would likely have ended up a lesser great power of Havath even without her white phosphorus magic, until she announced her intention to train her white phosphorus and become the most lethal weapon in Havath's arsenal. And they try to dissuade her, and then they do really, really carefully monitored training, and even when it's monitored and they have tried all of these things to keep it from actually getting into her system, it doesn't matter. It still does. It's not like enough yet to harm her right away, but it's still bad enough. And the effectiveness of it, like dragons who are supposed to be so impervious to fire, she's burning them alive, like no problem. And there's a whole, like, I like this a lot. There were other Havathi great powers who only stirred themselves at the greatest crises, who preferred to dabble in politics or indulge themselves, but Niana would never be one of them. She would never share their moral weakness. They were mere weapons. She was a loyal soldier. And eventually, she's wreaked so much havoc on her own body using this that they give her an ultimatum that she's going to die in months or weeks, or she can retire. And she at first is pushing back against their diagnosis, but it comes really quickly. It's like, becomes very apparent they are correct. And we have this moment here where she just unleashes in the present, and like the amount of white phosphorus that she pulls out is more than she's ever used. And it says that explosion killed hundreds. Surviving Havathi soldiers and mages who had been carried up into the sky by the labyrinth and been making their way down ever since, trying desperately to avoid magma, sunlight, and rampaging great powers. Scout teams working both for the Coven and Alustin, 2 of Indra's children, not to mention countless labyrinth escapees. And she hears the drumbeat slowing and is like, they're still alive, but I got them. They won't be alive for long. And then she finally realizes that it's her own heartbeat. The enemy mage had always been her own gravity magic. It had been the failure of her senses of balance and proprioception that had thrown her about, as they told her mind wildly different stories than her gravity sense had. The last spasms of a failing mind. And I was just like, again, it was tragic, but I was so distracted by the fact that her story ended there and there was no tie-in with what was going on with any of our other friends that I didn't even fully appreciate it because it just felt so out of place. So now we're going to go on to 59. Unwilling allies. And I really enjoy this bit because all of the librarians Errant have been cut down to a fraction of their numbers. There are 12 left, not counting Alustin and Godrick. And only one of them Hugh knew by name, Amundsen Dries. And I love this, that when he comes down toward them, there is a whole vibe of like, fuck. Is he gonna fucking, what is he gonna do, guys? Do you think he's not gonna, but he might though. Like, they all know they were involved with taking down his fucking mentor and his pacted companion. And rightly are wondering if maybe he's just gonna fucking wreak a little havoc for a minute, because they don't really understand the kind of mature prioritization and compartmentalizing that Hugh can do. And I will say, while I admire deeply Hugh's commitment to focus on the actual issue at hand and not let his emotions and more petty concerns, and I say more petty in quotes because somebody being fucking betrayed and nearly murdered is barely petty, but in comparison to the state of the world, it is. So in that sense, I admire him, and his maturity is commendable. But I will say that there is a part of me that sort of wonders if there will be a point where he gets pushed too far. He is so balanced. And I'm like, are you? Is anybody? Or, you know what I'm saying? It's just the sort of thing where there's an episode of Bones that I watched yesterday. And there is a person that Booth thinks is like a real danger and hazard to him. But the guy seems to have no ill will in the direction that they expected. He seems to be like very forgiving and looking more toward the future and not the past. And he was given a full like psychoanalysis, and everything comes across as very baseline and normal. And at first, that's what leads them to dropping this guy as a suspect, until eventually somebody's like, hold on. Absolutely everything is baseline and normal. That's fucking weird. That's not right. Nobody's like that. And I'm not saying that Hugh is, because we know Hugh has many struggles of other types. But, I wonder if there isn't like a ticking time bomb. Serenity now, insanity later. So Edmondson has the, what do you call it? The refractor. I keep fucking forgetting the word. Resonator. That's the one. He has the pieces of the one that was destroyed. And his is just like, I know it's not really useful, but we thought maybe there was something that could be done with it. I love this. His spellbook eyed the debris skeptically, then shook his covers and flapped behind him. And I just like to think that this is basically somebody holding up a piece of bread to me that's like burnt to a crisp. And I'm just like, I'm good now. Thanks. And Edmondson accuses them of dropping out of school. And Godrick's like, we didn't drop out. We just are doing other very important stuff. And Talia's like, we dropped out. And Godrick is just like, oh, my dad would be really bummed about that. And Edmondson is like, your dad would be very proud that you are still alive. And Hugh fucking just says, the four of us warlock pacted to one another, and we all have 12 affinities now. Surprise passed over Edmondson's face, one of the rare few moments of emotion Hugh had ever seen from him. And I was like wanting this moment to go on a little longer and hear what Edmondson had to say about this, but Sabe shows up right here. So everybody gathered together. There is a real sense of fuck this guy because Alustin shows up, and the looks that he is getting, the only one who's getting worse is Valia. And it's just really, it's tense. That's all I gotta say about that. Mackerel devoured this resonator easily enough, but Hugh felt a slight resistance through their bond, as though the resonators his spellbook had devoured had already started to fill him up. I missed that the first time. Oh boy. Does Mackerel have to poop? How does he make more room? What happens? Interesting. Is it like feeding him a Pokemon candy? Does he level up? Does he turn into and evolve? That'd be kind of fun. Sorry. MX Shard is in the chat saying, the specimen halls and affinity testers being a job that exists would be so interesting. That's what I want to do in this world if I was there. Living on an Assus really sucks. So many people have too much power and too many reasons to not care. I respect he doesn't want vengeance. I respect his maturity. I am not as good a person and would have snapped several times in some of Hugh's situations. Well, yeah, and that's the thing, is like, I 100% respect it all, but I can't help but wonder how much of that is sustainable, you know? Because sometimes what looks like forgiveness and forbearance is repression. And they are in a critical position right now where it's very easy to prioritize what's going on in this moment and be like, enough about my shit. People are going to die. The world is going to blow up, you know, and that only lasts so long. And then you go into a period where our problems have been for now solved and you've got downtime and you begin to think about shit. And, you know, I would not be mad if his feelings on things changed over time. That's all. So Alustin says, we've tracked down one more, but it's in a bad spot. The position is surrounded by the biggest swarm of those burning insect monsters I've seen yet. And they're besieging a demon who could practically be Bakori's sibling from what I could catch of its appearance. And he says, let's see. It's going to take most of us to punch through that mess. I really hope you have better news. Not really. The one we found's at the top of the labyrinth. How far up exactly? The very top. It slipped into the labyrinth somehow, so the eye of Heliothrax hasn't touched it yet, but all the nearest approaches are in direct sunlight. It's also well above the flight ceiling, so there's no flying. Now, I'm glad that this mention of the eye of Heliothrax has come up here because, folks, I feel like I don't have a good idea on the eye and how it works because I kept thinking that we were sort of on a countdown with that. And it seems like it's just been doing things, but if you're able to like get out of its path, it won't affect you, but that it is an ongoing threat, which is not how I thought it really worked. So there's a mention of the eye of Heliothrax, but the way that they are avoiding it and the way that it is just sort of, I thought that it was something that like came into being, activated, functioned for 5 minutes or so, and then was sort of over. But at this point, we're going on, I'm going to say at least like an hour since Heliothrax activated it, unless I'm wrong, but there's been so much happening. And I think I just misunderstood, or else Heliothrax's capacity has changed with her absorbing all the powers that she has, which is also possible, but I don't know how that would change. Like, from what I understood, the main thing was that she was getting access to different affinities and not that it was strengthening affinities she already had, but it may do both, which would just be very rude. So they're trying to figure out how exactly they're going to get here, and someone's going to have to climb the hard way, and Hugh says, I'll do it. Absolutely not, Talia almost yelled. There's plenty of folks better suited for this task. And she's like, you're too important to ... to the mission. I'm like, girl, it's fine. You could just say that you love him. Hugh is like, guys, I have the fucking like Stormward's crown. I'm the only one that's managed to like go above the flight ceiling, and I can make it reflective so that no light gets in. And Mackerel can scry. Like, I'll be able to do this in the dark with him. Nobody else can do any of that altogether. And Talia kept trying to argue, and eventually Hugh just comes up and kisses her and gets her to stop and really hear him, and she says, you'd better come back to me. And I love Godrick gives him a hug, and like Hugh goes, okay, wow, I really think I may have sustained an injury, but thank you. So this is when Sabe introduces him to her cousin Varen. He's most likely the fastest flyer among the group that can carry passengers. He'll take you as high as he can. And Sabe says, you lied to me. You told me if you had to choose between public speaking and letting the world get destroyed, you let the world get destroyed. And yet I just saw you doing public speaking to save the world. And he's like, that doesn't count. I was just talking to Alustin and there were people around. So then we jump into chapter 60, the scrap heap of history. And we are with Godrick. And he is noticing Edin Slane's energy toward Alustin. And is like, you really don't like doing this, do you? And Edin Slane is honest and is like, look, I get that we need to. I'm not arguing that, and I'll do what I need to do. But I fucking hate this. Like, it's repulsive. He killed my friends. He killed all my fellow council members. He betrayed Candoron. And the only reason that we're panicking and having to create these fucking task force right now is because he was about to do something fucking disgusting. We're cleaning his shit up. This sucks. And I fucking hate it. And Godrick sort of looks at him and he's like, no, you don't have to worry. I'm not going to turn on him. I'm not going to stand back and let somebody else do shit to him. I'm going to do what we need to do to get things done. But I am looking forward to the day that justice is served because fuck that guy forever. And that's all very fair to me. You know, that's as reasonable as I can expect anybody to be honest. Like, he's being more reasonable than a lot of folks would be. And I'll say that for myself, I tend to be very good at this. I am very petty and hold grudges. I have learned in a sort of like bitch eating crackers way, where if I have a grudge, anything you do, I'm going to side eye and make fun of. But when it comes to like the practical aspect, I am willing to set everything aside if I need you to get something done or we are on working toward a common goal. I am very, very able to set that sort of thing aside. It's not something that I have had to do that often in my life. And most of the people I've had to do it with, they haven't had like done the type of transgression against me that fucking like, you know, nobody had murdered all of the people in the council with me at something. So I don't know that I would ever be able to do it at this level, but I can be very, very practical. And I like to think I could do this. And it's the sort of thing that like, I also have the reverse that happens where I can see that just because I don't like somebody doesn't mean that what they're doing is like the wrong thing or an actual problem. It's just that I don't like them. And this has come up even with doing like the podcast. There are people who are in comments and stuff sometimes that really, really rub some of my co-hosts the wrong way. And they want me to like do something. And I have to be like, dude, this person's annoying. I get it. But they're not doing anything wrong. And just because you don't like them doesn't mean that you get to just come down on them and sort of bully them. You don't like them. That's fine. Avoid them. But it's, you know, and so you've got to like really learn to do that and dissect your own reaction to the way people behave. Because sometimes you don't like somebody for reasons that are silly and petty, and they're not actually grounded in any damage. There's no harm being done. It's just that the person bothers you. And that we're people, we're human beings. That happens. But you've got to learn to see clearly when that's what's going on and set it aside and figure out how to cope, because that's just life. Not everybody is going to be a personality that you work with well. And oh well, get over it, you know? So they finally come up on their target, and and it's Havath City's central bank. The vault door was wide open. The lower building was unidentifiable due to the larger building having crushed it. And the bigger hindrance was the swarms of burning insects coating the bulk of the mound and the ruined streets around it. And these things are bonkers. I think Alustin might have understated the size of the problem, Godrick said. We're archmages, my dear boy, Shining Cardivan said dramatically. We're simply going to stride right through and squash these bugs, well, like bugs. They're not wrong, Rhodes said. Swarming monsters like this are fundamentally limited by how many of their number can approach at once. They'll get in each other's way. And then he points out they are not generating their own heat. They're pulling it from other places, which to me means they are in a climate that is too cold for them, and they're doing this to survive. And if they don't have enough heat, they're going to die. And that just so happens to really align with Rhodes' affinity. And later on, Godrick is super irritated because Rhodes is extremely cocky right here, but then later can back it up. And if there's anything more infuriating than a person who's cocky as hell, it's a person who's cocky as hell for good reason. It sucks to just have to sit there and take it because they're right and they, it sucks. So Alustin said Bakori's whole demon species fled their world when its ether critically advanced too far. He's not the only individual recorded. He was a particularly powerful and vicious member of the species, but I expect this demon will have capabilities in the same general magnitude. So he suggests we can't risk damaging the resonator. We need to get in close and perform a targeted strike. So they go into this, and there's a little bit of a back and forth with, Graham's wife, Gila, saying most of us aren't crazy enough to want to stab demons. And Talia's mother is like, don't be a prude. And there's an ongoing conversation about whether or not that's prudish, which Shimmering Cardivan definitely thinks it is. Valia, for her part, has no interest in this conversation. It's just like, can we get the fucking show on the road? Jesus Christ. Godrick found himself standing beside Alustin in the battle line when they attacked. Despite the Archmage force's extensive flight capabilities, they had chosen to launch their attack on land, not so much due to the swarm's flyers, which were apparently scouts and posed only a moderate danger, but due to the ungainly auroch-sized pillbug beasts. The pillbugs, so far as they could tell, served two functions, as heat storage for the rest of the swarm and as anti-air defenses. Terrifying anti-air defenses. The instant Alustin had sent a trio of paper decoys flying out over the swarm, dozens of the pillbug beasts had instantly focused their alien sensory organs on the paper, aimed their abdomens, and cut the decoys out of the sky with highly pressurized streams of superheated fluid. And they have diagnostic spell forms, which are like, okay, so about that superheated fluid. 1, it can cook a person. 2, it can cut right through you or knock you out of the air. 3, it has a galvanic charge. And 4, is acidic. Plus, there's a poison mage who's like, I've got some tattoos and they activated them, so I think there's some poison as well. And Godrick is like, okay, that's just too many things. That just feels really overkill. Can, pick something. Jesus Christ. And I have to agree. So they have to decide how they're going to approach this. And I am not going to get into this part of the approach too much, going up against the bugs, because the more interesting thing is what happens a little bit later. So everybody is using their affinities against these bugs and trying to sort of carve a path. And there is a conversation between Alustin and Godrick about his father, in which Alustin's like, your father would be proud of you. And Godrick's like, yeah, thanks. He wouldn't be proud of you. Good for you, Godrick. And Alustin's like, yeah, I wish. Yeah. And Godrick says, in terms of his dad's death, that he deserved better. And Alustin's like, no, if this is if you were going to die in any way, I think going down, fighting to save you and his people and his home would have been how he wanted. And while I get what he means, or he could have just died of old age after having raised a son who eventually maybe had his own children, and that also could have been fine, Alustin. So I'm going to say he did deserve better. So shut up. I just don't like that he said no. I get that he would have been proud of the staff, and sure, that doesn't mean that he didn't deserve better, though. He did. So fuck off. And Alustin advises Godrick not to go after Heliothrax for revenge, to which Godrick is like, how the fuck dare you tell me not to pursue revenge? And Alustin is like, well, literally, it's a lot easier to go after this Dominion than Heliothrax. She has done some shit to herself that is fucking unhinged. And there's just no way. I'm sorry. It's easier to do this than it would be to go up against her. And Godrick's like, well, I didn't plan on it anyway. I was taking Hugh's advice. And Alustin's like, why does everyone keep talking about what Hugh thinks? And Godrick is like, dude, there are so many people that he has good reason to want to go after. And he just never did. And it's because he has bigger goals and he has decided to put his energy into that. And if you stop and think about all of the energy and expertise and time and creativity that you put into taking down this fucking city that was already being taken down, by the way, and you used it to do something productive, what kind of crazy shit could you have accomplished? But no, you decided to waste your time and your life and the lives of other people for some shit just so that you could be the one that did it. And honestly, it's fucking pathetic. All you did was speed up a process that was already in place and in motion, and just because you were being a brat and petulant and wanted credit. So, yeah, you wasted your time, you wasted your life, you wasted the lives of a lot of other good people, and go fuck yourself. And honestly, that was an entire sermon, and I loved every second of it. And Alustin really feels it, which was the most satisfying part, because people have said a lot of shit to him, and he's just rationalized it. Sometimes it's hit, but even when it has hit, he's just been kind of like, yeah, whatever. And this one, it feels like he really is like, fuck. And this is when Godrick finds out exactly what Heliothrax has been doing to herself, and he is just like, that is the most foul shit I have ever heard. And then, as they're talking, Alustin has a moment where he just clutches his head and sort of staggers and says a bunch of nonsense. And Godrick is like, oh no, is that the thing? And Alustin's like, yeah, it's getting worse. I feel like it understands that we're trying to stop it. And he's like, well, you can't think it's alive. And Alustin's like, of course it's alive. It has to be to infect other elementals, for the sake of anybody listening. But yeah, he's like, I don't know if it's aware. That's the thing I can't tell. And this is all I can think is maybe the way that Alustin goes at this point is he somehow gets sucked in by the tongue eater. And I don't even know what that would look like. you know what I mean? The fact that the way it works is through language. I don't know if there's a way to contain that. I mean, I know it's in his storage tattoo, and perhaps keeping it in there in a completely different directional plane means that it won't be able to access like Anastas. I don't know. So they finally get through all of these bugs, and they are starting to go through the imps, but they don't want to fight through them. Thanks to the risk from the pill bugs, they were being launched wrapped in multiple spheres of ceramic tiles, a windshield, even a spinning gravity shell, an extremely difficult gravity magic defense that required both Celia the Anchor and Scrathanax to maintain. And all they could do was hope that would be enough. It was enough to get them through. Barely. When Godrick and the others erupted out of the layered defenses into the bank vault, ready to brawl a demon without using any spells whatsoever, they were greeted with the last response Godrick possibly could have expected. I surrender. I surrender. Please don't hurt me. I'm just a carpenter. A what now? Talia asked. Now that Godrick was calming down, not so ready to fight, he started to notice the demon was in fact wearing a tool belt filled with carpenter's tools, and there were loads of bizarre alien-looking wood piled up in the middle of the golden jewels of Havath City. And imps seemed to be carrying the contents of a large woodworking shop. I'm a carpenter, the demon repeated, clearly terrified. I was on a buying trip through the labyrinth, looking for rare materials for a large commission when all this happened. I'm just trying to survive and get home. Huh, Sabe said. I don't suppose you've seen a bizarre enchanted book around anywhere, have you? Godrick asked. You mean this one? I found it in an unruined bookstore. It was just lying on a shelf, clearly magical, so I thought it could be useful. The imp slowly walked over and handed the book to Sabe, who took it with a bemused expression on her face. I'm Chenkis, by the way, and I don't suppose I could convince you all to help me escape this swarm? Poor things, they've been driven mad by the cold. They're usually quite docile so long as they don't feel threatened. And Godrick says, can you turn off your spell-degrading field? And he says, well, I can't. It's my aura, but I can pull it in close so it doesn't interfere with your magic. How do we know you're not messing with our minds? Talia demanded. We've met your kind before. The demon gave her an offended look. Because, first off, I'm the wrong gender for mind magic. Only 3 of our genders can do that, and only 1 of those to aliens like you. Tienkus gestured at their clawed tail tip as though that should mean something. And second, even if I could do mind magic, only a monster would do mind magic on someone without their consent. I'm just an honest carpenter, thank you very much. And Sedlov Seve, sorry? The demon sagged. I feel like I should be apologizing to you if you really met a member of my kind who did something so monstrous. Lived up to every awful stereotype? It's mostly just the sort of awfulness people say about refugees, but criminals like that do exist, sadly. I love this so much. Poor Tienkus. He's just out here trying to get his fucking job done. And go through labyrinths and do, go the extra mile to get his client some good shit. And then what should happen? He walks into a fucking war zone, accidentally picks up a random item that seems like, it just is maybe enchanted, fun, and is like crucial, and then winds up in the middle of a war. Like this just, poor Tienkus. Bless him. And then Talia picked a jeweled chalice off the ground, then tucked it into the dimensional storage tattoo around her mouth. Do you think we have time for just a little looting, maybe? And when she did this, I was like, he's going to wonder about this. And indeed, the very next line is, I didn't know your species could eat gold, Tienkus said curiously. Godrick and Sabe both sighed heavily. I really, really love that, especially because his assumption is like absolutely the assumption that any of our friends would have made if they were watching a demon put the thing in its mouth. Like they would be like, oh, apparently demons eat gold. And they would just jump to that conclusion. So I just really like the fact that, you know, something that doesn't understand fully is observing them and leaping to weird conclusions. This is just what happens when you rely on observations, you know, and in a world of magic. So I liked that. And I hope that Tankus is okay and that he gets to go home and keep on with his woodworking and that everything is all right, because it seems like this poor guy has had a bad day. I just realized that I've been using the he pronoun when explicitly John Bierce is using they. So apologies for that. I will try and keep that in mind. Because yeah, the reference to like only 3 of our genders can even do that. And I don't know if Chinkis even says how many, like out of how many genders. I think it's just only 3 genders. So who knows where Chinkis comes from, how many genders there were. But I do enjoy the concept of there being like 11 genders. That's fun. All right, I have to wrap up. But thank you guys so much for listening. Thank you, McShard, for hanging out. McShard in the chat says, sorry, I'm rambling a lot. Do not apologize. You were the only one here, too. So, you know, it's nice to have somebody participating. I appreciate it. And Dan, missed you today. Hope you can come to the next one. Hope everybody has been enjoying the coverage. And until next time, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.